This video is going to be a little bit different for me because a couple of weeks ago, TrimUI reached out and they said, do you want to have a look at our new unit, the Smart Pro S? And of course, I jumped at the chance. This is the first time that I'm taking a look at a review unit at about the same time as other reviewers get hold of them as well. So for me, that's very exciting. So I'm taking this very seriously, and this might not be as funny as some of the other videos that I've put out in the past. But also, I've just done a collaboration video for somebody, which is going to come out over the Christmas period on their channel, and I've used up all of my joke quota for this week, so there is that. Which means that I'm going to have to be the Russ from Retro Game Core of super budget handheld devices today. And we're going to see whether the TrimUI Smart Pro S is going to feed your handheld drug addiction. So grab your Kraken pipe and let's get started. TrimUI Smart Pro was never something that was really on my radar, but there's no doubt that it's got an awful lot of people who absolutely love it. And it wasn't until I tried the brick that I'd considered getting a Smart Pro anyway, the original one. Well, a few days ago, a package arrived that was labelled Electronic Entertainment Device, as if it was some sort of illicit vibrating toy that only mummy and daddy get to play with. In fact, when the postman delivered it, he did give me a knowing look and said that he could tell me where he could get these cheaper. And I said, it's all right, I've already got an account with AliExpress. So this video is something of a first look. This is your experience straight out of the box. This is the device as it arrives, with no tinkering, well, not much tinkering, I think I turned one thing off, and with the SD card that they kindly provided alongside it. Now, I should say that even though TrimUI sent me this unit for free, they don't have any editorial control on this video. All the opinions are my own, and I can't be bought for love nor money. Well, maybe love, but that's not what they were offering anyway. Also, if you're interested in this device, I do have an affiliate link in the description below, which if you would like to support this channel and you would like to buy this unit as well, don't just do it to support this channel, but if you'd like this unit as well, then if you use that, that would really help me out. So let's take a look at this device, and on opening the box, actually, this is a pretty premiumly boxed unit. I'm actually very impressed with the way that they've put this together. It looks and feels like a premium device. Inside, you get a Smart Pro S instruction manual, which tells you how to do the firmware update and basically what all of the keys are. You get the console itself, which is packaged really well, and actually, it's a really nice experience taking it out of the box. You get the full instruction manual, which in this case is actually worth reading because there are some things that you might want to do that are slightly different to other Linux devices. And of course, you get the obligatory USB-A to USB-C charging cable. But of course, the big questions are all about what this device can actually do. Has TrimUI fixed the problems with the original? Not that there were many, of course. The original Smart Pro was perfectly adequate for most things below PS1. But when you ask it to run PSP or N64, it would make a noise that can be described as digital whimpering. That was all well and good when all it had to compete with was the Anbernic H700 line of products. But the Smart Pro S promises a proper iterative upgrade, and we need to see if it delivers on that. Hardware-wise, we get a new chipset, the All-Winner A523 at 2 GHz, which should be about as powerful or play the same catalogue, basically, as the RK3568. You get 1 gig of LPDDR4 RAM, 8 gig of internal storage, which isn't going to be used for games, this is for your operating system. That's expandable up to 1 terabyte with an SD card, and that will be used for your games. There's both 2.4 gig and 5 GHz wireless and Bluetooth 5.4. You've got a microphone, a 3.5mm headphone jack, and all of that is powered by a 5,000 mAh battery, which should give you about 6 hours of battery life. The physical design has changed a little bit. The joysticks are larger now and they click, which on the previous model they didn't do, leading to a situation where players attempting to press L3 would simply press harder and hope for divine intervention. And these are TMR joysticks, which is one step above Hall effect. They're very precise, but I'm sorry to say, this was one area where I felt a little bit let down. Comparing them to the Mangmi Air X, these joysticks are an awful lot stiffer, and they do sit lower on the body, which means they don't have quite the same amount of travel, and you can't change the caps. It's much more like the experience that you'd get with an Anbernic device rather than the lovely sticks that we've already seen on both the Mangmi Air X and the Magic X 040. Having said that, if you're used to those budget devices, or perhaps the original TrimUI Smart Pro, you're going to have a very similar feel here, but you actually get an awful lot more control. Now, the Mangmi is probably going to be a point of comparison throughout this video, especially when it comes to build quality. This matters more than you might think, because budget devices often feel as though they've been assembled by somebody who learned about structural engineering from a pop-up book. And that's not something that can be said about the Smart Pro S. Squeeze the casing and some devices would respond by making noises that suggest imminent structural collapse. Well, there's none of that here. It's a very solid device. I would say this is a premium plastic feel that feels dense, like somebody actually cared about manufacturing tolerances. Shake the device near your ear and you won't hear any rattling, not anything significant anyway. And it's so much better than the TrimUI brick, and it's actually a damn sight better than the Mangmi Air X as well, which seems to have these odd rattles here and there. And the build quality carries across to other parts of the console as well. The D-pad, now obviously I can't use Russ's Contra test in order to do this because that would be silly. So instead, I've invented the Kirby Pancake test. We open up Kirby's Adventure on the NES, we press the down arrow, and then we make Kirby squish flat against the ground like a pancake, and if we can rock the D-pad left and right and Kirby doesn't move, then it passes the test. And I'm pleased to say that the Smart Pro S did admirably at this test. Kirby just wouldn't move. In fact, if anything, the D-pad does feel a little bit too rigid. For platformers, this is fine, and you seem to be able to hit the diagonals when you need to. For fighting games where you need to perform quarter circle motions and things with speed and precision and accuracy, the accuracy perhaps of a sushi chef, it may be a little bit less ideal. And as always, your mileage may vary. The face buttons, though, are something a little bit special. It looks like TrimUI have learned from their experience with the brick hammer, and what you have here is something that sits tight in the housing. They press cleanly. It's the sort of build quality that you expect from devices that cost an awful lot more, and finding it here is like discovering your budget airline has actual legroom. None of the buttons sound particularly loud or invasive. Even the shoulder buttons deliver a satisfying click, but nothing that's going to wake up the neighbours. Now, you don't have analog triggers here. And what you do have is a lot clickier than I would have liked. It's not a deal breaker for me, but I know some people do worry about these things. Overall, though, the benefits from the TrimUI Smart Pro S seem to outweigh any nitpicks I might have had, because using this device to play games is actually a really pleasant experience. The device doesn't even seem to get that hot during intense gameplay. And that's probably because you now have this active cooling. The fan has got 6 different speeds, and mine was set to automatic out of the box, which, to be fair, I think is probably the best option. At higher speeds, it does produce this whine rather than a whoosh, and it does have a frequency that some people might find a little bit irritating. Personally, I was able to ignore it completely. I spent quite a long time in Vice City, and the fan noise just sort of faded into the background during gameplay. You know, the game was much louder than the fan. It's certainly there, but it wasn't intrusive enough to make me want to hurl the device across the room, which is my benchmark for an acceptable noise level. And heat-wise, it did heat up, but not enough to worry about. The screen actually becomes slightly warm on the right-hand side, which I think is just over where the processor sits, the chip sits, but it wasn't uncomfortable to the touch. This, as far as I can tell, is good thermal management. The fan is doing its job without transforming the device into a portable radiator, which is exactly what you want from active cooling. And of course, this thermal management is going to be an aid to performance. And let's face it, performance is why we are all here. The original Smart Pro would take one look at a PSP game and immediately develop what could only be described as performance anxiety. On the TrimUI Smart Pro S, however, things are a lot different. We'll start off with N64 because this is something that you need to be aware of. I did try to load GoldenEye on this because GoldenEye is a pretty good frame rate benchmark for a demanding game. Unfortunately, it crashed immediately, like a toddler refusing vegetables. And after some digging, I discovered that the TrimUI uses Mupen64 plus GLES 2 as its N64 emulator, which has an older graphics plugin and it's designed for weaker hardware. Unfortunately, GoldenEye uses rendering techniques that this plugin just simply cannot handle, so it crashes. And on the Smart Pro S, each game has its own configuration file. You can edit that file to change which core it uses, but this isn't plug in and play. This is plug in and open a text editor and modify settings and hope that you've spelt everything correctly. If you encounter a game that doesn't work but you want to play, you're going to have to tinker. I mention this not really as a criticism, but rather as fair warning. This is a problem that other custom firmware has largely addressed on other TrimUI products. But here, at least for now, we are stuck with the stock operating system. I have every faith in the community and the people who develop the absolutely wonderful firmware that you can get for the Brick and for the original Smart Pro. They are going to address this, I'm sure they are, but until then, you have to be aware of this limitation. With that said, the stock card comes with some N64 games on it, and I did test a few out. F-Zero X ran at 60 frames per second natively, and some menu stuttering whilst textures loaded, but once you're actually racing, it locks in at that 60 frames a second. Mario Kart 64 runs at its native 30 frames a second without complaint. The chip is capable, clearly, of handling the N64 titles when the software cooperates. The device ships with N64 set to 640 by 480, which is 2 times native resolution. You can increase this in the settings. The sweet spot should be about 960 by 720, 3 times native, which matches the screen perfectly. I actually had this running at 4x resolution, but that was really only to test. It tested really well, everything ran at the right frame rates. But frankly, why would you bother doing this when you're not actually improving anything and you're just making more work for the chip and draining the battery that little bit faster? Having said that, this is a significant improvement over the original TrimUI Smart Pro. And I'm fairly confident with some custom firmware and a little bit of tinkering, you could get the vast majority of N64 titles running on this machine. Dreamcast 2 seems to be a major improvement. I've had games running at 59 to 60 frames per second. It's not set, it's not completely locked at 60, but it's a really, really playable experience, and you don't really notice any frame rate drops. You don't get any slowdown or any stuttering. There's no audio problems. It's a real improvement over what we had before. It does suggest that the new chip is handling Dreamcast really well, and that you could have a really nice experience with it. But the headline, the thing that we all came here for, let's face it, is PSP. Because with this particular form factor, PSP seems like the perfect system to emulate. So I tested God of War Chains of Olympus, and there's a reason that you will see us reviewers testing the same games time and again. It's because these are pretty good benchmarks for the system and what the system can do. Chains of Olympus was a particularly difficult game for the original hardware to run natively. It was meant to hit 30 frames per second, but there were various points along that path where the frame rate dipped, likely as low as 20 frames a second when a lot of particle effects were on the screen. The original Smart Pro couldn't handle this at 1x resolution, but on the Smart Pro S, I was able to play Chains of Olympus at 2x resolution for the most part at a locked 30 frames per second. However, During heavy particle effects, explosions, basilisk breath, that sort of thing, the magic effects, they all look really impressive, but those things murder frame rates and it drops. It did get as low as 20 frames a second at one point, but no lower, and it recovered almost immediately once the particles cleared the screen. And this happens in both standard and performance modes. And that might sound like a deal breaker to some, but of course you can always play this at 1x resolution and not have that problem. However, I'd suggest sticking to 2x because what you're getting here is essentially the same performance that you would get on the original hardware, which had exactly the same problems at exactly the same places. And you can see that performance when you load up something like GTA Vice City Stories. Now, this is an open world with streaming assets, and I was able to drive around at high speeds, checking out any performance issues that you might have. And you know what? I got a solid 30 frames per second throughout the cutscenes, throughout the gameplay. There's a few dips here and there whilst textures load in, and you do get a little bit of texture popping on vehicles, but that is a fairly typical PSP emulation experience, regardless of the device. Performance here is excellent. The only system that really seems to struggle on this is the Sega Saturn, and this is notoriously difficult to emulate on Linux anyway. Here, we're using the Yabasenshiro core, and I loaded in Sega Rally. This is a difficult game to emulate in the first place. You did have some frame drops in menus, and that's kind of the same experience you get across the board with a lot of different games. But it's certainly playable, because once I got into the racing, the frame rate stabilized at a nice 60 frames per second. Now, there were some graphical glitches, and this wasn't the best experience I've had with the Sega Saturn system. But it was perfectly playable. Of course, that was at native resolution, but if you want to play this at any higher, at 2 or 4x, for example, you're going to run into slower frame rate and frame drops. And that does mean that even though this plays Sega Saturn okay in some circumstances, it really is a compromised experience, and I wouldn't recommend getting this for the Saturn system. And, that's where the Smart Pro S caps out. GameCube and PS2 aren't even available on the stock firmware, so you are not going to get anything like this on that particular device. Nevertheless, I think this is really impressive for what you get, and we're looking at probably the best performing budget Linux handhelds on the market. Of course, if you really want to play more demanding games, then there is an option. The Smart Pro S supports streaming via Moonlight and Sunshine. And I've tested out a couple of games on here, Rocky Horror, Hogwarts Legacy, SnowRunner, Minecraft, all the sorts of games that I've just got lying around on my hard drive. And streaming worked well overall. Now, I did notice that there was a tiny little bit of lag during general gameplay. Most of the time, that didn't matter. And this is likely due to streaming latency rather than hardware limits, and probably something you'd find on any device. But they performed fine locally. For casual gamers, streaming is viable. For anything requiring really precise inputs, something like Celeste, you'll probably find yourself developing a nervous twitch every time you have to make that precision jump. All of this, of course, is tied together with the stock operating system, the same one that you'd be familiar with if you have any of the other TrimUI products. And it's quick. And it's responsive, and there's no stuttering, and the artwork loads in really quickly, and it's all very nice to use. It's everything that you would expect if you had one of the original devices. One viewer did ask me if the favourites are still randomly sorted like the original one, and yes, I can confirm that they do still remain allergic to logical organisation. But where does that leave us? The Smart Pro S, for me at least, as somebody with no experience of the original Smart Pro, has a couple of nitpicks over other devices that are on the market. Arguably, the Mangmi Air X is a better device with a more powerful chip, but it's also quite a bit bigger and it's a bit less pocketable. The TrimUI Smart Pro S has that lovely PlayStation Vita form factor that's become quite beloved of the gaming community. It's a competent upgrade. It fixes PSP Performance issues from the original. It handles Dreamcast well. The build quality is solid, the controls are improved, and the fan works without it being unbearable. For $100, this is actually a very reasonable product considering what you're getting. I'm going to say that this is the most powerful Linux device on the market. Now, there's a bit of a caveat to that because the Powkiddy RGB10 Max 3 Pro exists, but this was a horribly flawed device, which may have a stronger chip on a spec sheet, but hardware-level faults, driver and software issues, that means it just can't put that power down reliably. So I think that gives the Smart Pro S a pretty good pedigree. And it also gives you, the user, a much, much better experience. Unlike an Android handheld, this is a lot easier to set up. It's a lot easier to just load games onto your system and go, even though custom firmware will be available actually out of the box. You could use this system and not have to go through a whole set of training instructions, advanced tutorials, and emulator setups just to get things working. So if you have the TrimUI Smart Pro already, and you're looking for a significant upgrade, but something that gives you the same form factor and the same basic overall experience, then the Smart Pro S is really a smart choice. This would also make a really great gift for somebody if they're after a similar sort of gaming experience in this form factor. Because you don't have to get really into emulation or the Android ecosystem to be able to use it to its full extent. So this ends up being something that, yes, I would recommend to people. I think you have to take into account everything else that's on the market. You should take a look at the competitors. You should take a look at the Mangmi Air X. You should take a look at the Ioneo Pocket Air Mini, the Magic X 135. And you need to ask yourself, do I need that much power, or do I want this much power with this particular form factor? Do I want an experience on Android? Do I want the experience with Linux? But I think for plenty of people, the stars are going to align with the Smart Pro S. And this will be the significant upgrade to the Smart Pro that they've been looking for all this time. And that's what I think anyway, and I would love to know what you think in the comments below. Now, I did say this is a first look video, so I haven't tested this as much as I would usually test the device out before making a review. So please do let me know if there's anything you think that I need to cover, if it's anything that you would like to know about, any questions that you've got about this console, anything you think you'd like answered, maybe something for a more in-depth look at a later time. Any particular features that you'd like to go into, then just let me know in the comments and I'll see what I can cover in a future video. Until then, though, that's it for this particular video. I do hope you've enjoyed it. Until next time, all that's left to say is one more thing. Happy gaming.